the recording. All right, cool.
Cool, fair enough. So, to start off with, the question of identity. What do you think what identity is? Where does identity come from? What is awareness? Because people talk a lot about identity. They say I, myself, self. You know, and then I hear you saying it's emergent property of the brain. Scientists, a lot of scientists would say, yeah, emergent property of the brain. And then you hear theists saying, yeah, it's something external. It's like they come up with words like soul and stuff. What's your take on that?
By identity, do you mean like personal identity, the idea that we have a self kind of a thing, or like
Exactly,
philosophical?
yes. The self, yes, philosophical self.
Yeah, so I think identity is just a product of evolution. We just it's something that evolved as a result of a beneficial mutation that happened in species and giving us this complex model that we have us, and then there's other stuff that isn't us, and understanding the dynamic between the things that can hurt us and benefit us was
Yeah.
something that was very useful for evolution in order to produce successful organisms. And so I think that the identity is a result of evolution, and yeah, just an emergent property of the brain, like all
Mhm.
ideas.
Have you heard any sort of reasonable arguments for the opposite from the theists or any other scientists?
Not really. I mean, I don't really think arguments are very compelling. I think that in order to have evidence, you need novel testable predictions. And so I don't think that any arguments really count as evidence. It's just arguments are
Mm.
essentially just expressing the way you imagine the world to be, but it doesn't tell us anything about the way the world actually is. And that's what we need the testable predictions for. And so it doesn't really matter what arguments the theists provide because that's just telling us the way the world they imagine the world to be. And I don't really care about that. I want to know
Mhm.
something about the way the world actually is.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, sounds good. Got a second question is knowledge is mostly defined as facts, repeatable skills acquired through life experiences. Um, like you've got this theoretical or practical understanding of subject object on a repeatable novel or on a repeatable novel testing. Um, Considering reality as the only brute fact, because I've heard you talking about brute facts also, would you say that reality or existence is the only brute fact that we can sort of really say, yeah, that's a brute fact? Or how do you see that?
Well, I don't think we would say that reality is a brute fact. I'd probably say it's a necessary fact or a brute necessity. So it depends
Mhm.
on what your view of the world is. Like theists say there has to be a necessary thing, and I like just grant that for the sake of the argument. We can think that the universe is the necessary thing, and that's perfectly fine. Or you can just say it's a brute, unexplained fact that's just always been there. That's fine too. I don't prefer one or the other. I don't think there's any reason to think that one is a better explanation than the other one. Um,
Mhm.
so I think the universe could have been created by other things, like it could have been created by a god. Who knows? But there's no evidence of that, and so I wouldn't say that it's reasonable to say the universe is a brute fact. I just say that it happens to be a fact that we exist, and we can know that the universe does exist because we exist in it.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to say so, right? So we've got a third point is the principle of sufficient reasoning. I've heard you like talking about it lately too. What do you say about the principle of sufficient reasoning? When is that like wise to use this as an argument for anything?
Pretty much never. It's not a useful metric for anything. It just assumes that anything we see must have a cause, and then it makes up a special pleading kind of a, oh, well, here's
Mhm.
this one definition of this one thing that we haven't ever seen, but it doesn't need a cause. And so it's essentially presenting a problem that everything has a cause and then makes up an arbitrary solution, which you can just replace with anything else. Say, oh, there's the magical pineapple. And the magical pineapple doesn't need an explanation because it's super mysterious or whatever. And then essentially you just have the same thing that the theists are providing, which is just this made up definition of something that doesn't require any kind of causation. And so it's not really a useful or reasonable principle for anything. It's just kind of using our induction of how that we experience things in the world, like, oh, that tree fell over, something probably caused it. Like, yeah, okay, it's just induction. And
Mm.
applying that to literally everything except this one special pleading case that you've just made up for no reason just doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, good. I think a lot of people, probably they might go and listen to this, and then before they argue with you or before they have sort of a discussion, they just might go through and say, okay. So we've got the next one here. We've got the justified true belief. So, which seems to me very fuzzy, justified true. Who decides what justified is based on what? So, what's your take on that?
Well, it's kind of subjective. So you can make up different definitions of justification, or
Mhm.
you can even make up different definitions of knowledge if you want. But the problem in epistemology is trying to figure out what is the best definition of justification. What is the best one that we can come up with? And there's different ways to do that. And I think the most effective way is to compare it to experience. So we say that if we come up with a model of justification that can tell us something about reality that is different from our imagination. So, for example, I can imagine a unicorn, but I don't see a unicorn, and my imagination doesn't tell me anything about the future. It's not very good at that. But if I can create a model that can tell me about the future, things that my imagination can't, that's a pretty good reason to think the model is better than my imagination. So now we have a reason to think that this model has more justification than just my imagination on its own. And so
Mm.
its added ability to tell us something about the future is a good way to try and build a justification for knowledge.
Fair enough. Good. I'll definitely listen to it later on one more time because I see you're a very fast thinker, you're a fast talker, you're well experienced there. So I need to catch up with that one. Um, my next question was, what is the mind? Because many times is it like maybe we can just refer back to self, or like whenever people talk about things or talk about gods, spirits, ghosts, devils, demons, etc., and they like bring into the game the word mind. Yeah, my mind is this way, my mind is that way. And I've noticed that some people, when they say mind, they're just basically saying, okay, this is sort of the pooled information I currently have available, or my brain currently has available to work with. But some people consider that as more than that. So, is it useful in any way to use the word mind, or what do you think?
Um, I mean, I guess you could just say brain or consciousness or the self or whatever, but it's useful to discuss the phenomenon. So there's definitely a phenomenon that you have experience and that you're thinking, and you can refer to that as a mind. Then the question would be: is what is the mind? What is it made of? Is it made of matter, soul stuff, or some combination of the two? And so
Have you ever
it's
heard? Oh,
what?
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a useful term to describe the phenomenon, and then to discuss what the different possible explanations of that phenomenon are. So it's definitely useful in conveying the things that you're thinking about or talking about or arguing about. And so I think that it's a useful terminology, even though I don't think it conveys anything more than just physical brains or the processes of physical brains.
It's just basically just a starting point to start a conversation with and get refer back to it. Okay. Uh, let me see. Yeah, I've got like a specific question that I've never really heard you talk about or any other people. It's theists to refer to God in a sexist way as he, gender wise. Do you think that's problematic or not in nowadays, especially, I mean, not just nowadays, but also a long time ago, when men are dominating women world and deciding for women what they have to do? And every time when I hear these talking about gods, etc., they would say he, him. Don't you think that's problematic?
Depends what you mean by problematic. I think that the reason religion was successful is because it was mirroring human psychology at the time. And so because during the time period when religion, Christianity specifically, was developing, it just was the case that men were ruling society. The fact that they mirrored that into the religion is one of the reasons why it was as popular as it was, why it was easy to adopt for the people, because it mirrored their current society. It mirrored their the way they think that society should be run and what their values are. And so I think that the fact that it does that, the fact that it uses he and labels God as a man, as a invisible sky daddy or whatever, is a feature of human psychology, and the fact that successful religions are ones that reflect human nature and human culture during the time period. I don't
Mhm.
think I don't know if it's problematic in other. I don't know what it means to be problematic. It's just a feature of human psychology. It's obviously false. It's ridiculous. There's no such thing as this God thing. But the ultimate goal of religion is mostly just to encourage or inspire people, and the best way to do that is to mirror the culture of the time period, and that's it did that very, very effectively.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought like it might just reflect a little bit of the idea that man is godlike, because you referring to God as he and like specific gender, and then the man is sort of man referred as he, him. And in that case, the man would say, hey, I'm a godlike. I'm supposed to sort of tell what ladies have to do.
Oh yeah, for sure. I can totally understand that. Yeah, like the idea, but I don't think that idea comes from labeling God a man. I think people just start that way. People think of themselves as gods. They think of themselves as inflated importance in the universe when really we're just like a blue speck, like Carl Sagan's blue dot thing. We're nothing in the spectrum of the universe, but we think of ourselves as extremely important and grandiose when we're really not. And that, of course, would then be a feature of our religions and the way we treat our deities that we've made up. So I definitely think it's a reflection of human nature, but I don't think the problem was inherently from the Bible, or referring to God as a guy. I think that's just a part of human nature at the time period, and that was more what is problematic.
Okay. Yeah, you got the point. Um, Now, an interesting one is like, is math invented or discovered? So I heard like, scientists talk about it, and they were just sort of beating around the bush. So some of them would say, yeah, math was discovered. The other one, oh, it was invented. I don't, if I would say, well, what is it, the difference between invented and discovered? And I've heard you saying a couple of times, yeah, it's just like a language, basically, and it's useful. It basically matches the world we live in, just like every single aspect of life that we live in matches life. What do you think about that invented, discovered thing?
Oh yeah, I definitely think it was invented. So I think the difference between being invented and being discovered is that if it was discovered, that means it existed before humans and we
Mhm.
just found it later. Whereas if it's invented, it's something humans made up. It didn't exist until humans created it. And I think math is like that. It's invented by humans, we made it up. It's just a language to describe the fundamental nature of reality. So reality has a way that it operates, and we're trying to describe that, and we made a language to describe that, which is math and logic. So I think
But
that
mhm.
math was definitely invented, and it's simply a representation that we've made up to try to express the language of the universe.
But that doesn't mean that, let's say, if there were different civilizations elsewhere, different planets, universes, or whatever, they might have just the same thing, but we just don't know about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of our math is probably very close to the way the universe actually is. And so other alien species would come to a very similar, if not the exact same base form of math, like 1 + 1 = 2 kind of a math. And so I think that, yeah, the thing that we're expressing is a fundamental feature of reality, but the math itself is just a thing that is a language we've invented to describe just the way reality is. And the way reality is separate from math. Math is just a language we made up to describe the way reality is.
And it just basically has to match the model we represent at the moment as humans. Like an aunt would probably have a little bit of a different point of view. I mean, like let's say we were- we're just basically human beings, and we've got a certain setup as human beings. We have different eyes than a snake and ears, although we still have eyes and ears. But what would a snake say? If does math exist or not? I
Um,
don't know.
well, I would imagine that if another being like a snake had as much intelligence as a human, it would also create a language to describe patterns in the universe, and it would be very similar to our math.
Mhm,
But I think that again, the language is just an invented thing. The patterns themselves is the part we're asking, what is that? And the patterns themselves, I think, are something just a feature of the universe. And I don't think math is like the abstract concept of math exists. I think it's just made up by humans. The abstract concept of math is just something humans invented. But the abstract concept describes something that does exist, which is the universe, the way the universe operates. And that's a real thing, not an abstract thing, which does exist. But it's different than math, because math is just the abstract thing that we invented.
mhm. Okay, yeah, makes sense. The laws of nature. Science is referring to the laws of nature in a different way than the theists. Theists would claim there must be a lawgiver. And when scientists basically say the laws of nature, they're not really saying, yeah, these are really like ultimate laws, but you've got an observable universe, and you can just basically see with current level of technology, we can sort of, yeah, to a certain degree we can speculate, but at a certain degree we can test certain things and then say yes, we call these laws. um, how would you describe the laws of nature from your point of view? What are laws of nature?
Yeah, scientific laws of nature are just regularities that we observe in nature, things that we see that are the most constant or the most universal of all the patterns we see. And so the laws of nature describe the things that we think are the most fundamental patterns in reality, like which we think are like the fundamental forces, gravity, the weak electromagnetic force, the strong force, those kinds of things, and then quantum mechanics, those kinds of things. So laws in science just describe patterns in nature, whereas of course, the theist says, well, oh, if there's patterns, somebody has to have a lawgiver or a pattern maker or whatever, which doesn't make any sense. Like, that's completely ridiculous. Because even if God existed, there would have to be some pattern in God. He has to have some kind of a nature to him. And so, if the theists are correct, then something would have had to have designed God to make God the very particular way that he is.
Hmm. Fair enough. Another term is the supernatural. Seems to me also a pretty fuzzy way of sort of arguing for some, for existence of a deity. Have you ever heard a very good argument for what supernatural really is? I mean, besides saying, yeah, supernatural is basically just something that we just don't know. There is a phenomenon, but we just don't know why this is happening. And while these would immediately assign this supernatural phenomena as basically as a result from a deity, what do you think what supernatural really means?
So I think that supernatural means a non-physical mind. Pretty much whenever somebody uses the term supernatural, they're referring to some non-physical mind, a ghost, a spirit, a goblin, a god, angels, demons, whatever. Usually, when people say not supernatural, they usually mean some kind of a non-physical entity doing something. That's not
Mm,
always the case. There are some cases where people use supernatural, like magic, like Harry Potter kind of a stuff, but it's mostly in reference to a non-physical mind. And so the way I use the word supernatural versus natural is to make a distinction between unguided forces versus intentionality of some kind of non-physical entity. And I think that that's
mm.
probably the most useful definition to apply to supernatural to distinguish it between the natural.
Okay, good to hear that point of view. Another one is universe versus cosmos. That's been sort of put on the plate many times, and so there's a lot of confusion. Even like when I hear discussions between theists and atheists, and so there's a lot of misunderstanding, because I think a lot of theists, they don't agree that there's anything beside the universe, or and they're not even sort of familiar with the word cosmos. Where's your stand on that?
Yeah, so science comes up with terms like atom. The term atom means it's Latin for the smallest constituent part.
Mm,
And when scientists first discovered what they called atoms, they thought those were probably the smallest things, like particles, hydrogen, helium, lithium, gold, silver. Those are atoms. That's what they called atoms. But then we realized later on that those things are actually made of smaller things, like neutrons and protons and electrons, which are made of gluons and bosons and et cetera, et cetera. And
mm,
so, but we didn't change the name. We still call them atoms, even though they're not the smallest constituent parts. The same thing
right.
applies to universe. So we had this idea that the universe is everything, all that exists. And then as we made discoveries in physics, we could say, oh, there could actually be multiple universes. And just like with atom, the word continues to refer to the thing that it originally referred to, but there's now a more fundamental level there. And the theists are using the word in its original usage to mean literally everything, not
Mm,
taking into account the modern scientific usage, which shows that there's actually something more beyond the universe. And so it
mhm,
would be like uh, taking the term atom to mean the smallest constituent part and just ignoring the fact that atoms are actually made of protons and neutrons and electrons and smaller
mm.
things. And so the theist is conflating the old terminology and applying its usage to modern physics with ignoring any of the modern usages or the modern discoveries. And that's what cosmos refers is the newer word to refer to absolutely everything.
Fair enough. I fully agree. um, Purpose. Where do you see sort of the difference between the purpose of living species as sort of you would present it, comparing to the theists?
Um, Purpose of living species compared to what?
Let's say you're not you're atheist, you're not a theist. So, would you say is the purpose of your life, and what is the purpose of someone who's sort of a theist,
Oh, a
believing
theist.
in gods?
Well, I'd say the purpose to all conscious things is happiness, is trying to find happiness. That I think is what the purpose of life is. And I think that many theists think that the best way to achieve happiness is to um, pursue God. I think that's what they're trying to do. And I disagree that that is a good way to pursue happiness, but I think that ultimately the goal of humans is finding happiness.
Yeah, I want to be happy. What happiness is made of, that's a little bit of a different question, right?
Yep,
There's
sure.
there's a lot of things. If you don't get enough food, if you don't get water, if you don't get enough sleep, I think the level of happiness sort of dramatically goes down the hill. Language, the importance of language and signs just as mimic. When it comes to explain the existence, or just basically been talking about now using language, explaining quite a lot of terms. Sometimes in order to explain one word, you need 10 different words just to basically define that one word. That makes it extremely sort of complicated, the whole thing based on language. What do you think how reliable language is when it comes to pursue or to find the ultimate truth?
Well, I think language is just a representation of the ideas in your head, pretty much. And so I I think that there's a difference between the ideas you're having and the words you're using. Like obviously your words can't accurately represent your ideas, and so they're not as accurate a representation of what you're thinking as your thoughts themselves. And so there's definitely a language divide in the fact that you can't use language perfectly to express what you're thinking or feeling. And there's another divide between what you're thinking and feeling and how accurately that maps onto reality. And so obviously the way we think about things is not an accurate representation of reality. Like we think of our this can we think of as solid when really it's 99% empty space between the
Right.
neutron and the electrons. And so the way we think of the world is clearly not even close to accurate, but we can get get more and more accurate with subsequent ideas layering on top of one another, and that's what science does. So science starts with certain basic ideas like I exist, and there's some difference between my imagination and my experience, and we try to build on that further ideas to create a more accurate model. But how accurate is that model and accurate in representing reality? It's actually very, very small. It's a very, very small portion of reality that we actually understand. Like Thomas Edison said, we only understand 1 millionth of 1% of anything, and that's pretty accurate. Our models and understanding of reality is extremely incomplete, and using our language to try and express those models is also incomplete and difficult because different people interpret words in different ways and find different patterns in those things. And so no two people will have the same interpretation of how reality works based on the interpretations of the what they're reading or how they're being exposed to the ideas or the words to express this model. And so there's lots of different aspects to it, but I think that we are still very, very incomplete in our models of understanding reality.
Mm. Fair enough. Yeah, I've long time ago, someone said on an airplane sitting next to me, "What I know is endlessly small, and what I don't know is endlessly big." And I'm trying to use that endlessly small to explain the endlessly big thing. And I was like, "Okay, here we go. I know nothing." Do you sort of when it comes to famous philosophers, because I hear theists citing famous philosophers and saying, yeah, but they were theists, and sort of, do you respect like these philosophers as authorities on anything?
Like which ones? Past theists, modern theists?
I would say modern theists.
Sure. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of very smart theists who are experts in different aspects of philosophy, epistemology, ontology, modal logic. There's theists who specialize in each of the different branches of philosophy, and they're not just theists. They also do real philosophy on the side, in addition to being theists. So they definitely are experts in their fields that they are studied in, just like a neurologist can be expert in neurology and also believe in God. Philosophers do the same thing, where they are experts in some feature of philosophy and also believe in God and try to use their expertise to indicate God. But I do think that they do have real, legitimate expertise in their field, and that it is something that you can use to gain a lot of knowledge if you take them seriously in that expertise.
What makes him an expert? Because I hear plenty of times, and especially like in the Muslim discussions, you hear the scholars are saying, and what makes you a scholar, and what gives you the authority, sort of, then to speak for the others? It's just by reading a book and saying that's the way it is, or what do you reckon?
Well, I'd say if you have a degree in the field, like if you, uh, for example, Trent Doherty is somebody who I've debated. He is an expert in epistemology, and he's wrote many papers on epistemology that have nothing to do with God whatsoever. And those papers have had a pretty significant impact in philosophy in general, uh, because epistemology is a real field, completely separate from a God conversation. It's its own kind of a field, and there's problems in epistemology that are interesting problems that philosophers take seriously, and they're trying to discuss and solve those problems. And even if someone is a theist, they can study epistemology and get an expertise in epistemology enough to be able to publish papers and make an impact in the field. And that's the way that you could measure, do they have expertise and do they have a way to accurately say that they can represent the scholars, is if they're publishing work in the field that's actually making an impact in the field, then yeah, they're probably experts.
Fair enough. Tom, I'm tired. I'm smashed. But look, it was really nice to talk to you. Thank you very much, sort of, for agreeing to, yeah, get online and to go through with this. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I'll be happy if you could send me the link to it.
Sure.
And if you don't mind, I'll just post it all over the place.
Cool. Will
And
do. Thanks for coming
I'm
on. Really,
looking.
thanks for inviting me on. I appreciate it. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Oh, they know me.
Okay. Well, I meant
They
like
really.
from if it's on my channel, they don't know you. But the people on my channel
Oh,
don't know you.
okay,
So
okay. They can just go on menuplan.org. It's menuplan.org, but it's got a couple of sites, so that's pretty much it. Hey, mate, you're doing a great job. So get a bit of yeah, good resting faces there.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you too.
So, take care, mate.
Talk to you later.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye.
So how can I get out?
Just close the window.